Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Living Life on the Offense, tackling men's mental fitness with former Detroit Lions quarterback Eric Hipple. My name is Dr. Jodi Frey, and I'm your host today. I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore School of Social Work and principal investigator of the Healthy Men Michigan Project. This project is supported by a CDC cooperative agreement, and our contents today are the responsibility of the authors. Our comments do not necessarily represent official views of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention or the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm so excited to be speaking today and to bring to you Eric Hipple, former NFL quarterback for the Detroit Lions and current outreach specialist for Eisenhower Center's After the Impact program. Our agenda is to provide a brief overview of the Mental Health Michigan statewide campaign, and then to let Eric talk about how to build awareness and break down stigma around depressive illnesses and suicide with his program, Living Life on the Offense. We'll conclude today with different ways that you can take action. To set the stage, I wanted to provide some background about working-age men, depression, and suicide. This is a recent report by the Suicide Prevention Resource Center that looked at suicide prevention for men in the middle years. And what they found is that men ages 35 to 64 represent 19% of the population in the US, but over 40% of all suicides in this country. Men in their middle years are very difficult to reach and engage in traditional mental health services. Our project is designed to reach out to working age men, ages 25 to 64. It's rare that we see programs focused on this population, and we're very excited to have the opportunity to try new innovative programs and resources to reach this hard to reach population. From our report, we know that without targeted interventions to engage men in assessment and mental health treatment, suicide will continue to increase among men in the middle years and will continue to compromise a significant proportion of the US population for at least the next 25 years. Reducing the overall suicide rate in the US requires making a substantial reduction in suicides among men in the middle years, which brings us to Healthy Men Michigan. Our project is a comprehensive online screening and referral intervention which integrates two existing and promising online programs. To date, this is one of the first projects and studies called Healthy Men Michigan that evaluates such an online screening directly focused and designed for male-focused interventions and reducing suicide ideation and behaviors among men in the middle years. We're merging best practices from screening for mental health and man therapy as a way to engage men in help-seeking behavior and lead to greater online and community resource referrals, helping to also reduce depression symptoms and other related factors to suicide. We view suicide prevention as a public health initiative, and viewing this as a form of comprehensive violence allows us to take a more comprehensive and community-based approach to reducing suicide. It gives us an idea of how to effectively reach out to men using a multifaceted program and online intervention. We know that we need to connect with the community. We're reaching out to men, helping to connect with them wherever they may be, whenever they are ready to seek help. With that background, I'm now going to turn the program over to Eric Hipple to share his personal and professional observations on suicide and suicide prevention. Thank you, Eric.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be with you. So the After the Impact program was at Eisenhower Center was created using veterans and also former NFL players because when they transition out, we are a behavioral unit, and typically when things go wrong, they would find themselves behaviors that were destructive and in a position to where life just changed for them. And so the idea of living life on the offense is a proactive way in order to look at your life. What can we do to be proactive in our health? And so without a game plan, life can hit us pretty hard. You know, in football, we watch film after film after film of the other team because we want to know what they do so we can be successful with a good game plan. And the more information you have about what they can do, then the better your game plan will be, and the better your success will be. This play, actually, we're not going to run it. You have to go onto YouTube and type in Hipple gets hit if you want to see what happens to me without a good game plan. But it's a pretty exciting hit, and it's fun to listen to the announcers because they even talk about the hit. So it even talks about cultural change, because what the NFL used to be, but with new information, they've been able to change their sport and make it a little bit safer and more aware. And so it's about game planning. And I always thought it was really strange. If we do that about a simple game, trying to spend so much time about what the other team can do to hurt you, why don't we do it for something that's even more important to us, and that's our health, and specifically our mental health. And if we're going to do that, then let's just start from the beginning, because it's about information. So what we do know, the brain's about 3.5 pounds. It sits in our head, pretty well protected. It's got 100 billion different neurons that create trillions of connections. From the moment that we're born, we start taking information in from our senses. We start creating these connections on how we're going to operate, who we're going to be, how we're going to solve problems, and enact in our environment. But it's about that core mission of solving problems is what we're all about. We are great at problem solving, and our brain is intricate in doing so. It solves problems all day long. It solves problems night and day, whether we're awake or we're asleep. It's about problem solving. If you ever thought about gaming, like video games, for those that play video games, why it's so addicting, it's like one of the purest forms of problem solving, because every decision we make in that game has a consequence to it. So we're constantly learning, constantly adapting, and constantly changing to get to the end of that game. And the thing is, games have multiple levels, because if they just had one level, if we got to the end, we wouldn't play that game again, because there's nothing more to do or to learn. We'd go on and try another game. So that's why they have multiple levels that keep us engaged. But it's about problem solving. And our brain is intricate and connected and complex. This is the latest MRI of the brain mapping that's going on, and trying to get all the pieces of the brain and how it actually works and operates. But one thing they found is brain plasticity. That means the ability for your brain to continually map and remap itself, and with new information, connect and make new connections. And the ones connections that we use over and over and over again, they become faster, become stronger, and so they become habit forming, and so we don't have to think about those things anymore, right? Because we do them automatically. And in fact, brain plasticity means from today, from the moment we're born, all the way to the moment that we die, our brain is constantly changing, and we change it by the decisions that we make and the information that we learn, and habit forming is how it operates. And so when we start talking about problem solving, how our brain actually solves problems, if you look at the right side of there, it's kind of like automatic. In other words, the things that we habit form, the things that we train for and do over and over and over again, they sit in our subconscious. We don't have to consciously think about them when we're doing them. And the things on the left-hand side, if you look at it, of course, it's a big question mark there, because during our daily events, we come across new things that we have to decide. And so we look at them, and we look at the consequences to each decision we make, and we make that conscious decision, and that's in the moment. And then, of course, in the middle, if we want something long range, we have to think about where we're going to go, what we want to be, and what we want to do. Then we put a game plan together and set goals on how we're going to get there. So speaking of problem solving, so these are some of the problems that we face: financial, relationships, housing, work, transition, and there's more. But these are some of the basic ones that we solve every day. We solve them every month. But when I hear in my work that somebody dies by suicide, I usually hear people say this: oh man, they just had to file bankruptcy. That's what happened. Oh man, they just went through a breakup. That was the problem. Oh man, they just lost their job. That was the problem. You see, they try and attach it to a problem that caused the suicide. And it's not the problem that's the problem. It's the inability to solve the problem. That's the problem. And so what is it with this great problem-solving brain of ours that gets in the way and causes us to have problems that we can't solve, and make our decision process where it gets convoluted? Well, we have injury that can happen to us, an illness, stress, and trauma are the four basic things that can affect us and affect our problem-solving abilities. So if you just want to look at injury for a second, one of the most common ones, and certainly most touted about in the media today, especially around football, is concussion. A blow to the head or a change of direction where the brain actually gets touched by by the side of the brain, and it causes network disruption. But normally that will heal with time. But we have to be aware by symptoms that we are hurt, so we don't hit it again while it's in that form. The problem, though, you can't see it. You can't see the injury, and so we have to depend upon symptoms. That's how we depend. There's other injuries that can affect us too. Just a pulled muscle, or a tear, or a strained knee, strained back. It causes inflammation, and that inflammation can affect our moods and how we feel as well. So we have to be aware of injury altogether. And then there's something else that we can't see, and those are brain illnesses. Brain illnesses affect us. In fact, one of the major onsets is between the ages of 15 and 25. And if you think about those time frames, the brain illnesses, depression, ADHD, addictions, bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorder, and general anxiety disorder that I've listed. There's many more, but those are some of the major ones. Those are some of the ones that we might have a genetic disposition for. That means we have maybe a genetic marker, but it doesn't mean it's going to get expressed. It only gets expressed in times of maybe stress or transition, and that's why it's major. One of its major onsets is because it's the age of 15 and up to 25, is because there's a lot of transition things that happen to us then, and we're forming connections as we go and cutting ones that we don't use anymore, and that gives us a prime time for us to actually be affected. But the thing is about brain illnesses, since we can't see them, again, we have to depend upon symptoms. But I want you to understand that early recognition is one of the major keys. That's why screening is so important, because every single one of these are treatable, and most of them are treatable with just talk therapy. So they don't have to have medications necessarily, but the health professional can help guide you in that area. But the main thing is early recognition is the key, and we have to depend upon the symptoms and how we're feeling for that, and that's why screening is so important. And of course, there's stress and trauma. I'm going to talk about stress for a second. Is stress a good thing or a bad thing? We ask ourselves. Well, it's certainly a good thing if somebody jumps out in an alley, in a dark alley, and tries to take your life. You can either defend yourself, or you might have to run, fight or flight. We want that stress because it can save our lives. In sport, sometimes we activate ourselves because we want to perform better, and so we activate that stress access. And so we pump ourselves up, or we psych ourselves up. The thing is, when the event is over, stress comes back down to a baseline, and we're back to normal again. The type of stress that's damaging to us is when we think about the future. The unknown is the most stressful thing there is. So what's going to happen next? I worry about the future. I worry what the next step's going to be, what is going to happen to me. Or I ruminate about the past. What could I have done different? Why did that happen? And I'm haunted by it. And guess what? If I don't handle that, then it keeps me super hypervigilant and keeps me activated in that stress access, which is actually damaging to every organ of the body that we have. That's why stress management is so important. These 5 things: predictability, controllability, relationships, trust, and meaning. Predictability is because that's why we have schedules. So I know what's coming up next. I'm not surprised by it. I can plan my day. I can plan where I go. Controllability, the ability to control your environment, is really important. Let's think about this for a second. We train for certain things. I'm sure you have a fire drill that you would do if you had a fire in your house, or at work, or at school, or in some cases, what happens when there's a disaster comes, a tornado, where would you go? So we have controllability over that. We don't plan on having one, but if it happens, we have control over it. There's one thing about controllability that's so important. Just like what's going on now, like down south, and like happened over in Texas and happened over in Florida with the hurricanes, where you have traumatic areas or natural disasters. If children are involved, oftentimes the relief workers that come into the area with children that are there, they'll give them a choice. Of a stuffed animal? Would you like the stuffed bear or the stuffed bunny? By offering them a choice, the kids, when they choose, it lowers their anxiety because they feel like they're more in control. So that's how controllability works. And the one thing I know that I can always control and that we can control is the next step, what we do next. So we can always maintain controllability. We are built to be in relationships. We are actually wired for it. Humans are built to be in relationships and form communities. And we have a special thing that we have that by looking at another person, we can have empathy. And that's how we're connected. So we can feel one another. Of course, having trust, feeling safe, and feeling protected, and having trust in your relationships. And of course, purpose and meaning. Why am I here? Those 5 things are so important, yet those 5 things can get ripped out. Like I said, a disaster, divorce breakup, something else that interferes and comes in, a transition, a move, a change of station, moving from one job to another job. Those transitions can rip those things out, and we feel like we're out of control. By putting them back in place, and we feel more secure, and we can manage our stress. Trauma is another thing that can affect us. And the thing about trauma, sometimes it's misunderstood because they think, oh, something really terrible has to happen to a person for trauma. It's not. Trauma is actually an experience, okay, that we go through that we do not want to repeat again. And by doing that, our brain tries to help us by, one thing it does is try to fragment a memory. If you think about somebody who's gone through a traumatic event and they try and put the story back together again, it might sound different every time they tell the story a little bit because it's trying to recall it, but the brain's trying to fragment that memory to protect itself. The thing about that is it stays in the emotional side. It never gets a chance to go over to the logical side of the brain where it can go into a file cabinet with a timestamp on it, and that's where it belongs, and now I can go forward and move away. Now it stays in the emotional side waiting for the next smell or next similar circumstance or thing all of a sudden pops that thing out and I re-traumatize myself. Okay, so that's why we need to have trauma debriefing or expression or grief and loss intervention if we've gone through a loss. We need to talk to somebody in those cases just to get the debriefing done and know that how it's going to affect us, and so we can move forward and actually grieve the proper way. So what happens if those things are out of control, stress out of control, or brain illnesses that start to manifest themselves and unrecognized, and trauma? This is what happens to us. These are some of the symptoms that I was talking about. The symptoms of sleeping too much or too little. And I say that because maybe it's not so much insomnia. Maybe it's even more than that. Maybe it's the fear of sleep because I can't turn my brain off. Maybe it's where I'm just tired all the time, even though I'm getting sleep, but I'm not getting deep sleep. And so I'm just tired all the time. I feel like I got to sleep all the time. Loss of pleasure, things just, you can't feel anything. It's just flat, just blank. Can't feel a thing, and there's just no joy in life. Appetite, sometimes you start craving carbs when we're stressed out. Our brain says, feed itself. We need it maybe in a circumstance we need to start stacking on carbs, and so we eat too much. Or it could be that I'm so hyper vigilant that I'm not hungry at all. I'm staying in that stress zone. Then loss of concentration, irritability, anger, especially in men. Oftentimes that depression comes out in anger, isolation. We start isolating ourselves because of our thoughts, anxiety, and anxiety can oftentimes lead to avoidance. If I feel anxious, then I'll try to avoid it. How do I avoid it? Okay. Pain, our pain threshold actually gets lowered, and so things hurt more. And maybe stuff like backaches and headaches might start forming as well. And then again, sadness, hopelessness, where there's no hope. You feel like there's no tomorrow. I talked about avoidance and anxiety and avoidance. One of the ways that our brain tries to protect ourselves to avoid, I don't want to be anxious, and so maybe I try to avoid myself. And so alcohol, risky taking behavior, and suicidal thoughts, those three are symptoms as well, but they are also problem-solving tools the brain's going to use, okay, to try and avoid. So alcohol and substances, if we've ever formed a connection there, like we had our first drink, we've formed a pathway, the brain will start going back there to try and avoid anxiety and not feeling good. And so it might go there more often, and also you might see an abuse pattern start. Risk-taking behavior, just to feel something. If you have no pleasure whatsoever in your daily life, and you feel like you're hopeless, like things aren't going to change, maybe, a risk-taking behavior might be getting in my car and driving really, really fast. It might be walking through a store and I put something in my pocket just to see if I can get away with it. It might be going out in the town and just whooping it up with something and maybe taking advantage of somebody that you wouldn't normally. Sometimes it might even be people that step out on marriages or step out on relationships just to feel something different, okay? And of course, then there's suicidal thoughts. And suicidal thoughts are a coping mechanism, and it usually comes along like this, where things are just overwhelming, unable to solve the majority of the things that's happening to you. You feel overwhelmed, and just the thought of death might come in and say, if I wasn't around anymore, I wouldn't have to worry about this stuff, and that seems like an option. And once you plant that seed, then it just starts to form from that point forward as a coping mechanism that go to it over and over again, like with alcohol or anything else, and start saying, maybe not being around is the plan, is the solution. And so plans starts forming. And that's a dangerous place to be, because once you figure out a plan, oftentimes you're not reaching out anymore because you have your answer, and that can be deadly. So we have so suicide. When suicide does happen, oftentimes it looks like this, where there's a contradiction in your life, where things that you used to be doing aren't working for you anymore. Maybe it's at work and you're using the same thing, but things have changed, and maybe you're passed over for an advancement. Why did that happen? Okay, maybe you're symptomatic because of brain illness is taking hold, and just you don't feel good, and maybe you're showing up late, but you just don't, things aren't working for you anymore. And when that happens, it gets to a certain point where collapse can happen, where all the things start dropping. Your relationships, your the way that you feel, the way that you operate. Okay, and feeling like a burden is one of those things that happen because when life seems like it's living without you, and you start slipping behind, you feel like a burden to your family, to your community, to yourself. You just feel like a burden, and so you'll isolate. Isolation doesn't mean I lock myself in my room. It can, but it can also mean I'm around a lot of people, but I'm just not engaged with them. I feel like I'm disconnected. And so when that happens, suicide can become an option. We have to have an intervention, because at that point in time when somebody is suicidal and they feel like a burden, they oftentimes will not volunteer information. So we have to ask them. We have to engage with somebody if we pick up on the symptoms, and one of the best ways that we can do that, of course, is engagement and looking at them. Remember I told you about this thing about empathy? That means looking at another person. If you just take 5 seconds and look at somebody eye to eye, you can pick up information. And sometimes you might see they might look sad. They might look disconnected. They might try and break your eyelid because maybe they don't feel worthy. And so just by looking at somebody, oftentimes we can pick up some information. And certainly some of the surrounding things, like maybe they're missing work, maybe they're sleeping all the time. Some of those other symptoms we talked about can go hand in hand. But then we have to ask them, what is going on? What's happening with you? And be persistent until they give us the information. Okay? And then, of course, then we have the chance to restore their life if it's restorable. And sometimes maybe it's not because of a change of job or a change of relationship. Maybe their old life's not restorable. But that's okay, because guess what? Reinvention can happen. And sometimes to the most terrible traumas and tragedies, the reinvention of a new person and coming out of it and seeing the light on the other side is a great thing. And so reinvention can be a really great thing. I know many people that go through the trauma, which is sometimes the trauma of their retirement, go through this reinvention piece and become somebody different on the other side, and they're happy and live the rest of life very happy. As we're talking here, and I reflect back on some of my fun days in the NFL. I played 10 years in the NFL. All 10 years they were with the Detroit Lions. And the first breakout game I had was on a Monday Night Football, which was fantastic. It was huge, and it set me up to be a starter for like the next 6 years. And then at the end of that time, I started getting beat up. I started getting injured. Started getting hurt a lot. So I went through surgeries, and it took a toll on me. I became kind of a different person, not so much just physically, but also mentally as well. And I went through divorce. My wife moved back to Utah with our 2 kids, and then I went through. My last game was against Minnesota. Had a really bad game. It's my 10th year. Just come off a major injury, but anyway, halfway through that game, they benched me. They put me on the bench in the third quarter, and they cut me the next day. I was 32 years old. What do you do now? I had not a clue. This was my identity. This is what I knew, and this is who I was. I didn't know what to do. So I took a little bit of time off. I was dating somebody at the time. And so I knew that I would have to go to work. And so I plotted out a plan on what I would do. Got remarried, started a business. And within the next 5 years of that business, I was actually started making more money than I did when I played football. Don't think that's too great, though, because we didn't make what they make today. So anyway, but by all accounts, I was doing great and super and fine. But I didn't feel that way. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just didn't feel good. Is this it? Is this all there is? And I started becoming symptomatic, just like all those symptoms that I showed you earlier. That's how I felt. I didn't do anything about it because I didn't know exactly what it was. I don't know, is this it? So in effort to, I started avoiding work. I started not going to work. My business started to fail. In an attempt to try and save the business, I decided to fly down to Arizona. And that morning, my wife looked at me and she said, "You don't look very good." And so she's going to drive me to the airport. It was while we were going to the airport that day that I just started becoming overwhelmed with all those thoughts that I've been having. And I grabbed a piece of paper that was on the console and I wrote, "I'm sorry, I love you." And I handed it to her and I jumped out of the car going 75 miles an hour on our way down to Detroit Metro. I hit the pavement going about 70 miles an hour. The cars behind me didn't hit me. They swerved. I was very fortunate in that. But I ended up on the side of the highway, this bloody pulp, unconscious. I woke up in the hospital and I was all bandaged up because of some surgeries and they had to do. But as I woke up, there was a psychiatrist that was sitting next to me at the bed and was talking about what they can do, put me into, give me a psychiatric evaluation and find out what's wrong. Stigma is so strong that I was not going to have any part of that. And I told him I don't need him. There's nothing wrong with me. And he kind of looked at me funny because he realized I just jumped out of a car. But I said, "Doesn't matter. I'm fine now." And I dismissed him. Next thing, I got out of the hospital. I went about my business. I tried not to talk about it. I tried to put it behind me and just move forward. And that was the way I handled it for about 3 years. I just went forward. I didn't learn anything, and I never got treatment. And that was a problem. Because 3 years later, my son, who was living with my ex-wife for 1 year, then he would come with me for a year, then live with her for a year, and live with me for a year. I had him when he turned 15. He had started off in the high school with a great, doing fantastic, popular, good grades, captain of his freshman basketball team. But it was after the holidays, going into springtime, all of a sudden he started not feeling right. I didn't know what to do because, I kind of recognized it, but I didn't know what it was. And so I asked him, "Are you getting bullied? Is that what's happening at school? Is that why you don't want to go to school?" "No, Dad, I just don't feel good," was his answer. And his grades continued to drop and more symptoms started appearing. And as I said, those earlier symptoms I showed you, just like I had, he had almost every single one of them. And then, of course, "Is it a teacher, Jeff? Is that why you don't want to go to school?" "No, Dad, I just don't feel good." It got to the point where his grades fell so low that now he's not eligible to play basketball and he's sitting on the bench. Saturday morning, I walked into his room because I had to leave on a business trip. And I kind of shook him awake. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. And I could see that he had tears in his eyes. And I said, "Jeff, when I get back from this trip, we'll figure out what's going on and we'll do something about it." The next day, I got the phone call from my wife. And she told me that Jeff was dead. He died by suicide. When you hear that as a parent, or anyone really, you just want to scream and go back in time and change it, but you can't. It's too late. I flew back to back home, went directly to the morgue to see him. And when I looked at him in the morgue, I wanted to die. That's what I felt like. I just can't live with this. But I couldn't kill myself because I know what it feels like now to be a survivor when somebody does take their life. And I didn't want to put that pain on anybody. So I did the next thing in my mind, which was just to be numb. I started drinking a lot and very often. I started using Vicodins and pain pills. I started using prescription medication like Xanax. And between all those things, I was numb for about a year. I wasn't worried about my wife who had to take care of some of the stuff. I wasn't worried about my 7-year-old daughter who was in the next room when my son died, how it would affect her. I was just numb for about a year. And then I got pulled over on a DUI. And in that DUI, the judge gave me all kinds of choices. I didn't listen to any of them because I didn't care. And the result was I ended up spending 58 days in jail as part of the sentence that he gave me. And when I was in jail, I sat there in my cell, didn't want to talk to anybody, wouldn't let any family members come, no former players come. I wouldn't let my pastor come, no one. I just wanted to be by myself. It was towards the end of that stay that I decided, we had a common area that we could go, sit around in. And I walked around that little common area and I started talking to some people and listened to them talk. And in that conversation, there was a guy there that told me the reason why he was in jail was because of a cop that pulled him over and because his taillight wasn't working. and that's why he was in jail. And I looked at him, and I couldn't believe what he was saying, because he had no responsibility whatsoever about the fact that he was drunk, and this was his third DUI. So no responsibility. But then it hit me like a brick. Oh my gosh, is that me? I have an excuse to be here because my son died. And I realized I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the opposite. I want to learn what happened to him. I want to learn what happened to me. And for that matter, I want to learn what the deal was with my mom. When I was growing up, my dad would say, your mom's not coming out of her room. She has one of her spells. What was that about too? I wanted to know. And so when I got out, first thing I did was suicide prevention, but I went to a place called the University of Michigan Depression Center. And that's a word I never thought would be in my vocabulary, was depression. And I went there, was screened, was diagnosed, got treatment, but more than that, I got an education on what this stuff is. And what I gathered from that was, the stories that we have, who we are, the stories that we have in our past, they do shape us, but they don't define us. What defines us is what we do about them. And so I chose to go on the path of trying to learn this stuff and try and put it in place, but not just so we can identify when something goes wrong. What can we do to stay right? What is the things that we can do to help us to stay healthy? And what does that mean? Well, first we have to describe what mental health truly is, okay? It is defined as a state of well-being, okay? That means a state of well-being. It doesn't mean just because I don't have bipolar illness, I'm healthy, or because I don't have depression, I'm healthy. No, that's not the standard. The standard is much higher than that. It's a state of well-being and who we are and appreciating who we are and liking who we are, respecting ourselves. That's what it's about. So how do we get there? And I ran across a guy by the name of Captain Bryce Lefevre one day in my work at the Navy in suicide prevention, and he laid out this keys to mental fitness for me. And he said, these 6 pieces, they all work together. And if you want to maintain mental fitness and mental health, this is what they are. So I'm going to go through this for a second with you, because they're keys that I think we want to be able to operate in our own life. But you know what? If we have got kids or we got family and people, let's share this with them as well. Because the first one, responsibility, you can almost cross that out, because oftentimes in today's world, we don't use that word correctly sometimes. But I want you just to look at this. How about recognizing our choices? That means we choose everything that we do, so we might as well recognize that we're part of our life. And if we do that, that means that I'm recognizing the good things that I do, but I'm also recognizing when I make bad choices. But I recognize them. Because if I do that, my self-esteem will change, and my self-esteem will continue to grow. That means that as I continue to make a good choice, self-esteem goes up. Make another good choice, my self-esteem goes up. Make another one, self-esteem goes up. I make a bad choice. That's okay. As long as I recognize it, I'll learn from it. And that means my self-esteem continues to grow because I won't do it again. The trouble is, if I don't recognize that I'm part of my life, that means I go through life like this. Something good happens for me. Woo, man, was I lucky. Something good happens for me. Man, was I in the right place, right time. Something bad happens. Not my fault. I'm the victim. Something bad happens. Hey, not my fault. That's his responsibility. And I get into blame. See, and if I'm in that world of blame and feeling like a victim and not taking care and not realizing I'm a part of my life, then what happens is my self-esteem never grows. And it's impossible to be sense of well-being and be truly mentally healthy if I have no self-esteem, or if my self-esteem is really low. Self-esteem low is oftentimes what causes bullying, when somebody needs to control another person. It oftentimes is what brings on arguments and brings on self-doubt. It also brings on, as I said, blaming others for things that happen. So we need to have a good, healthy self-esteem. And with a good, healthy self-esteem, guess what else happens? I can actually have a really good, solid boundary that I can protect myself with, because if I like who I am, then I want to protect me. And I can say no to somebody. No, I'm not going to let you talk to me that way. No, I'm not going to let that happen. Why would I do that? I like me. I wouldn't let that happen. That also means that a good, healthy boundary, I can also be aware of the circumstances that I get into that says, this isn't healthy or this is dangerous for me. I will pull back because I like me. I don't want that for me. I want good things. And so I got a good, healthy boundary. And with that good, healthy boundary, I can also choose the people that I want to allow close to me that I can be vulnerable with. And that's a strength in this case, because oftentimes in our relationships, we have to share. We have to be close. We have to be vulnerable so I can understand the person I'm with. They can understand me. that we can protect them because we're still inside our boundary. That means I might not let certain people inside my boundary because I might not think they're healthy for me. And so if I'm doing that, that means my communication becomes that much better as well. Because with communication, I can solve a lot of problems, right? So sometimes we need to communicate, and that's how we can solve problems. But it does take a commitment. It takes commitment means I have to do this on a daily basis. I can't just try it once and say, okay, well, there we go. It's a mindset that constantly lives with us. It says on a daily basis, I'm engaged in the things and being aware of what I'm saying, what I'm doing, and also being aware at the end of the day, looking back and saying, I did some really great stuff today. And don't forget that stuff we do automatic. Remember on our problem solving, the thing become habits? We're the one that program the habits. So that means that's part of us. So recognize those things too that we do automatically throughout the daytime. Those are important as well. And with that commitment, then we can actually change the world and change our relationships. The reason I say this is important, especially, changing the framework of how we think, because it makes a big difference on how we operate. Because when I operate from this point of view, that means I have control. And remember that one thing I talked about when it came to stress control? It's about controllability. This is the one thing I can always control what I do next. The other thing about being healthy is knowing your story, knowing who you are. We've all had accomplishments. Some of us had trauma. We all have mentors. We all have different environments and different DNA, but we all had a childhood, and some of us had losses. But the one thing we all have values. Regardless of you know it or not, we have them because that's our basis of operation that we formed through all these decisions that we make on who we are. But they're important to recognize because they are essential, they are personal, and they are also universal. So I put a list of these values up here just to take a look at, and you can get to this yourself if you type in Google list of values, all kinds of stuff pops up. And so I encourage you to do that because if you look at this, I said they're personal, certain words will resonate with you. They will pop out and say, yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's me. That's me. And they'll resonate with you. And if you've never done this before, it might take you quite a while to make a list of 10 values that you stand for and who you are. And you take some little time to do that, you'll find yourself, thinking about them. Like, yeah, is that who I am? And you start learning who you are and also say, I'm a pretty good person because you have some pretty good values. But it's also important for us to know the people that we're involved with because they have a value system too. That means we can't trample over their value system. We can't step on them, okay? And we have to protect our value system, right? So we have to operate that way and respect each other and our values and who we are. It's just so important for us in our outlook on life and who we are because we recognize who we are, then we truly get to that sense of well-being again because I respect who I am, right? And I stand for something. So when we talk about mental fitness, okay, it doesn't mean that things don't go wrong. They do, okay? They do in life. That's just the way it is. But mental fitness means I have the ability to do what's next, and I have the choice of what I do next. And so that means that we are in control. You are in control. So being tough, okay, with purpose. I have purpose in my life. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm headed for. I communicate. So when I come to problem solving, I don't have to wear a mask with people or play games or manipulate. I can be open and honest and here I am and what I stand for. So I can communicate what I need and also how to get it and how to talk to another person and engage. And then of course, support. Most of us understand what support is. We stand for each other. We support each other. We understand oftentimes in the work that we do, we support the mission, our military friends that, support the mission when they go out. Football players support the mission of, winning on Sunday to try and get to the Super Bowl. But in everyday work, everyone has a mission, right? And everyone has support and they know what to do. But the support I'm talking about is what do you do for yourself? Because that's important too. What do we do for ourselves? So we have to look at that as well. I'll tell you a story. I once was talking to a bunch of naval aviators, so the pilots, that fly on the aircraft carriers. I was doing the suicide prevention work with them. And I said to them, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's a sign of strength, not weakness. And the pilot up front says, we don't need help. And I said, well, that's fantastic. I'm glad that you don't, and I'm really happy for that. But can I ask you a question? Would you continue to fly your jet if nobody maintenance it from now on? Would you continue to fly it? And he said, no. How come? because if you don't maintenance it, even though, it's got redundancy in it, it's a very complex aircraft. It's got fly-by-wire systems. It's got hydraulic systems. It's got all kinds of components and stuff that are involved in that. And if you don't maintenance it, sooner or later something's going to break, and then something else might break, and something else might break, and pretty soon you're going to have a catastrophic failure, and it's going to crash and burn. And I said, exactly. So you don't think the thing between your two ears, that brain of yours, is far more complex than the thing you're flying. That means it needs maintenance too, and it's early and often. So don't be afraid as a man to say, hey, this is bugging me, or hey, I have a question about this, or hey, I'm not feeling quite right. So what can I do about it? Because that's part of being mentally fit, is taking care of ourselves. Okay, and that means sometimes we do take an assessment. Sometimes we do need to learn about the things that can harm us and the things we need to be healthy with, and we do something about them. Sometimes that requires treatment, and that's okay. I'm going to talk for a second before you go to the next step. So I did talk about the 30-year-old son died. When she got into high school, she started having some problems herself, and she's the second one in. If you look at this, she's in the middle of three girls. That's my youngest daughter, and she started having trouble in high school. Unbeknownst to us, she was hiding things. She didn't want to bother us, but she was starting to cut and starting to self-mutilate, right? So her friends got to her and said, if you don't talk to your parents, then we will. So she came to us in the nighttime and said, I want to show you what I've been doing. She did. And so she said she was ready to talk to somebody. So we took her and she got therapy. She was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress and treated. It took about 3 months, 1 week, 1 day a week. And at the end of that, she kind of bloomed and all of a sudden became a different person. She had about a 1.4 GPA in high school. She graduated this last year from Eastern Michigan University, magna cum laude, with a degree in social work. And this is just something, as a father, you look for. As a man, you try and fix things, but we're important for that too, because she looked up to me when I got my treatment, and that's what helped her come to us as well. So I just want to let you know that there's a great outcomes to mental health. Mental fitness means we do the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves, and sometimes that means taking an assessment.
Thank you, Eric, so much for spending time with us today and sharing your personal story, your story with Jeff and your whole entire family of recovery and resilience. We're so honored at Healthy Men Michigan to be partnering with Eric Hipple and all of our partners throughout the state, many of you who are online, working together to reduce stigma about suicide and mental health and reaching men throughout the various Michigan communities. As Eric mentioned, screening and taking an assessment is often an important first step. We need to let men know that there's information and resources available to them 24 hours a day. And mental fitness, checking your mental fitness is a sign of strength, not weakness, just like maintaining a jet plane. So I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk with you about some different ways that you can get involved to help keep this movement going forward and reaching more and more men throughout Michigan. I also want to just make a quick note that if you do have questions, Eric and I will be happy to respond to them. Please post them in the chat section, and following the closure of the webinar, we will provide responses in writing and send them out to you. So the slide you have in front of you has a couple different mechanisms for how you can connect with Healthy Men Michigan. The screenings are available 24 hours a day at any time from any computer or smartphone at healthymenmichigan.org. Please do encourage men ages 24 to 64 to go online for a free anonymous screening. We would love to have more friends on Facebook. Please like our page and follow us at Twitter. We send out messages almost every day, information, articles, also trying to highlight what some of our partners are doing in Michigan locally that you can connect with. So please take a minute to join us online, and we found that that has been an important avenue to reach men in the community. And obviously, if you have questions, there's emails, healthymenmichigan@mentalhealthscreening.org for how to get more involved. This next screen actually has different ways that you can work now to help spread the word. So as I mentioned, social media is one of the best ways that men are hearing about the Healthy Men Michigan campaign. We have pre-populated emails, tweets, posts that you can send out to members in your community, your workplace, your organizations, and you can visit us at the online toolkit that you can see there in number 1. Michigan is a big, diverse state, so there's lots of areas to cover, and we're asking for your help to spread the word with free promotional materials that you can actually download and order from us for the campaign. The workplace we're finding is another great way that men ages 24 to 64 are finding out about the campaign, so please do share our websites and newsletters and link up with us to share with employees and colleagues. There's so many different ways that you can get involved to help men connect with the free screening and resources throughout the community. So please do sign up to be a promotional partner and help us spread the word about mental fitness throughout Michigan. I did mention earlier in the webinar that there is a research project that's going on. So as men come to our site and participate in the free screening, they may find that they're eligible to participate in a voluntary and paid research study that's done online. So we're trying to, again, look at what are some of the most effective ways to reach men and to help them connect to resources in the community to reduce suicide ideation and behavior. And our final slide provides where you can go for more information. If you have any questions about the research study at all, please contact me, Dr. Jodi Jacobson Frey. If you'd like to join our campaign and be a promotional partner or have any questions, please contact Courtney Miner. And if you'd like to learn more about Eric's program, After Living Life on the Offense, please contact him at his website and leave a message. Thank you again for joining us. We do hope to connect with all of you as you join us as part of the Healthy Men Michigan campaign. I hope you have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.